What's up, everybody? It's Dave here with Comics Games Life, and today's story is Vader Dark Visions. This is a 5-part miniseries that came out in 2019 that highlights some of the things that take place while Vader is trying to track down a rebel spy. These events happen shortly before Episode 4, approximately 1 to 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, aka the destruction of the Death Star that takes place at the end of Episode 4. And this is a seasoned Vader, one whose violence and cruelty the galaxy has come to know very well. The beginning of our story takes place on the planet once a planet filled with glass and metallic structures, flying machines, and a booming population. Now it's a shadow of its former self. This is due because of the arrival of a being called the Ender, a massive beast that decimated this once thriving civilization. Since then, generations have passed, and its current inhabitants have long forgotten how their ancestors once lived, because now they mostly all live underground, inside of the remaining hollowed out structures, while everything above ground has pretty much been covered with vegetation. And every so often, when the Ender is asleep, the inhabitants come up from underground where they harvest vegetables, hunt for meat, and collect whatever else they can before having to go back underground when the Ender awakens. Now, during one of these scavenging trips, a young boy happens to be running around with his droid, and when he looks up at the sky, he sees explosions. And he says to himself, the gods must be at war again. But whatever's going on up there cannot be as worse as the god that's down here. And this is a primitive people, because as they're referring to the gods up there, what he's really talking about is a battle between the rebels and the Empire that's currently taking place just outside the planet's atmosphere. And as we can see, the dogfights that are taking place between TIE fighters and X-Wings, Star Destroyers, and all the mayhem and chaos that's happening in the stars. And in his very own TIE fighter, we see Darth Vader engaging in battle, a master pilot taking out X-Wing after X-Wing. But he has also taken on some damage, so he's forced to land on the planet of Sith, and his emergency landing has him crashing into a body of water. But unbeknownst to him, he has just awoken the Ender. And with the planet's inhabitants nearby, they're seeing this, and now they're all running back to their underground sanctuary, all except for one, the young boy who first saw the explosions in the sky. And he knows he should run, he knows he should escape, but he's so curious of what is about to happen. As he looks at the downed spacecraft, and the hatch flies open, and what emerges is what he would call the Black Knight. Cloak flying in the breeze and firelight dancing across his armor. And that's when a giant eyeball opens up, staring directly at Darth Vader. And then it emerges out of the water, this massive beast, hundreds of feet tall. And that's when Vader ignites his lightsaber. And the boy looking off in the distance is seeing what's happening. And he just can't believe what's going on. He sees this Black Knight with this magical flaming sword piercing the eyeball of the Ender. And then the beast falls. And he's thinking to himself, this thing has eaten armies of men, it's pulled warships out of the sky, and yet this one single Black Knight has managed to take it down, to do what no one else has done. And when they both land to the ground, Vader wastes no time, and he runs up along the Ender, slicing it as he goes. Awed by what he sees, the young boy is rooting for Vader, not knowing exactly who he's rooting for, but just then he stops and yells, "No, look out!" And that's when the Ender grabs up the Sith Lord, squeezes him tightly, smashes him through buildings, and throws him to the ground. The boy is devastated. He put all of his faith into this Black Knight, this mysterious figure who he thought was going to end the tyranny of this beast, to allow his people to live upon the surface, to breathe the fresh air, to feel the sun on their skin. And he's saying he's so stupid, he's running back to the sanctuary, and he's almost there. He's so close. And then the magnificent beast rises up from behind him. And at that point, he realizes his life is over, and he begs the Ender. He asks for forgiveness. "Please, I'm sorry." And just as the massive clawed hand is about to take his life, his dark savior appears, riding on the back of a horned beast fit for a Sith Lord. Armed with his lightsaber, he reaches out with his other hand and uses the Force and pushes the boy out of the way. Now even the boy is confused because he doesn't know if, did this magic that he used just save me, or did he merely just push me out of his way? Regardless, he's thankful and can do nothing but watch this epic battle take place. Vader leaping from his steed, armed with his red lightsaber and the dark side of the Force. He forces the monster's mouth shut to expose its throat, and then he stabs the beast in its jugular, and then hacks away until his roars turn into a gurgle. And as the Ender has fallen, Vader now stands, and he sees the boy. And the boy is referring to him as his savior, but he can't help but feel that something's off about him, that his hairs are all standing on edge. And with a stuttering voice, he says, "Thank you." And then Vader responds with, "You should not thank me, boy." And in that moment, a Star Destroyer and a multitude of TIE fighters show themselves through the clouds. Vader shuts off his lightsaber, and looks at the boy and says, "It seems that the Force is with you today." And just like that, Vader and his TIE fighter are picked up by the Star Destroyer, and they instantly leave the planet. Now later that night, we see the inhabitants celebrating a grand victory, obviously because the Ender is dead and gone, and they no longer have to live within the depths of the planet, but they can now explore and build upon the planet's surface. But this evening, as they're celebrating around the campfires that they've built around the fallen body of the Ender, many of them there are coming up to the boy and asking them, "We heard you saw it, tell us what happened." And so he grabs a stick and stabs it into the fire, and goes on to tell them how their savior, the knight in the blackest armor, armed with his sword of fire, defeated the tyrannical Ender. Now moving on to issue number 2. As we can see from issue to issue, the artists do change. Not only that, but each issue focuses on a different aspect of the main plot. So we get a better idea of what the main plot is at the beginning of the second issue, where we have the Empire hunting down a rebel spy. Now I'm assuming that this hunt takes place during the time at which Vader is killing the Ender, because by the look of all the destroyed X-Wings around, I'm assuming that this is the same battle that we see in issue number 1. Now the rebel spy is actually escaping, and the commander of the Death Star that's pursuing him decides that it's not worth it, seeing as how during this battle they were actually able to cripple the rebellion by destroying one of their bases, destroying the insurgents that they encountered, as well as not taking on a single Empire casualty. Although this spy has escaped with the schematics of an important military factory, the commander will still chalk this up as a successful mission and figure out a way to massage that portion out of his report once he gets back to base. So the commander retreats to his quarters, where he enjoys a hot beverage, but he's quickly interrupted by a junior officer with a message from High Command, saying that the Emperor is delighted that the mission was successful and that Lord Vader will be there shortly to collect the rebel spy. Now at hearing these words, the commander's soul pretty much left his body at this point, because we can see by the fear in his eyes, by not actually capturing the spy, he has messed up big time. As he remembers an encounter that he once had with Lord Vader, he was entering into a meeting room where he sees the dead bodies of strangled officers still in their chairs, and Lord Vader force choking another officer, then breaking his neck and throwing him across the room, and leaving a then Lieutenant Tyux with the simple comment that failure is unacceptable, be better than they were. And now an older Commander Tyux fears what's going to happen to him if Vader gets on that ship before he finds the rebel spy. With the horrible death hanging over his head, he commands his ship to break ranks, leave the fleet, and jump into hyperdrive because we have got to find this spy. Now it seems that fortune favors the bold because they had no idea where the spy was, and they took an educated guess, and they show up exactly where the spy is. Unfortunately, he's in the middle of an asteroid belt, where his little ship is hunkered down on top of one of the asteroids, but this Star Destroyer is massive, and if it gets in the middle of this asteroid belt, it's not going to be long before this Star Destroyer gets destroyed. So he sends out a squad of TIE fighters to go chase this guy down, and they're whizzing through the asteroids, and they're doing a good job. But this rebel spy is clever, and he decides to take refuge on the nearby planet, which so happens to be in the middle of a giant sandstorm. And these TIE fighter pilots, they're reporting back to the Star Destroyer, and they're saying, hey, we cannot go in there. If we go in there, this sand is going to get into our instruments, we're going to overheat, and we're all going to die. But the commander does give that command. Not only does he tell the squadron that's already out there, he commands every TIE fighter on the ship to go down and get this rebel. Reluctantly, they obey, and inevitably, they all die. Except for a couple who do follow the rebel spy out of the sandstorm back into space, but because the sand did jam up their instruments, they're pretty much sitting ducks, and he circles around and blasts them into oblivion. Now, Commander Tyux is pretty much insane at this point because he's commanding the Star Destroyer to go into the asteroid belt just to get this one rebel spy. Now, I love what the artist of this issue, Brian Level, what he did. He captured the fear, stress, and anxiety that the commander is feeling right now. I mean, we see it in his whole face, but to be honest, even just in his eyes tells the whole story. The crew of the Star Destroyer knowing that this is a bad idea, but seeing as they're part of the Empire, following orders is kind of their thing. So they fly into the asteroid belt, and as they're constantly hit with a barrage of asteroids, they see that the rebel spy is flying his way into the mouth of an exogorth, aka a space slug. And Commander Tyux delivers a 2-word order to his already bewildered crew, and that's follow him. Now what happens next is probably the last thing the space slug thought would ever happen to him or her, but the Star Destroyer forces its way into its mouth, kicking and screaming. Now the rebel blasts a hole into the body of the exogorth, which he easily passes through, and then here comes a Star Destroyer that rips the exogorth in half. Now, I thought this would have been a very impressive scene to watch in a movie. Dare I say, this could have replaced the scene that we all learned to not like so much in Episode 8, The Last Jedi. I'm not going to go into exactly what scene I'm talking about, but I'm sure you guys can put the pieces together. Now, it seems like the rebel spy is in their grasp, because the only thing between them and him is space and opportunity. So they fire up the tractor beam, but the problem is nothing's happening, nothing's working. Now, come to find out, that space slug was infested with Minox, parasites that just love sucking the energy supply out of starships. And while they're sitting ducks, bing bang boom, rebel ships drop out of hyperspace. Now, as the commander looks death in the face, he gives the final command to abandon ship. Now, I'm sure he would rather go out this way than facing Darth Vader. And like every true leader, the captain goes down with their ship. And we see the Star Destroyer in flames. The rebel ships went to town on it. And we see Commander Tyux hunkered down behind one of the command modules on life support, where he hears a familiar set of footsteps. And his greatest fears materialize as he looks up and sees Lord Vader, telling him failure is unacceptable. Now, as we enter into the third issue, you can see already that even though this is a Darth Vader miniseries, we're not necessarily given any insight or new information behind the character of Darth Vader. This is more of different perspectives of how people see Lord Vader. In the first issue, we saw the boy who saw him as a savior, and in this last issue, we saw Commander Tyux seeing Vader as death incarnate. Now, issue number 3, when this came out, it was a bit controversial, but we will be seeing another perspective that someone has about Darth Vader. And this is through the eyes of a young nurse on the Death Star. As a Lambda-class T-4A shuttle arrives at one of the hangars in the Death Star, stormtroopers and officers line up to welcome its passenger. And as Darth Vader steps off the shuttle, he makes his way through the formation. But behind the armored stormtroopers, we see a woman's face peering over their armored shoulders. And we can tell by the look in her eyes, she is enamored with Lord Vader. While everyone else is fearful of his strength and power, she is encaptured by it. But she's quickly pulled away by the doctor who she assists, scolding her and telling her this is not the med bay. Now, this doctor has the responsibility of treating Darth Vader's wounds. He makes a couple of different trips to the medical bay in this issue. Now, I'm not entirely sure which battles he had gone through before each visit, but I'm assuming it's after some of the events scattered throughout this series. So as the nurse returns to her duties, she's gathering up supplies and everything that the doctor is going to need to treat Darth Vader. And in doing so, she spots him in the hallway, trips, falls over, and Vader walks past her like she's not even there. Now, she is love-struck, so every action or inaction that Darth Vader gives her, she takes as this grand gesture of his love for her. As we see in the next panel, the whole art scheme changes. The reason why is because this is portraying what's going on in her mind, this fantasy world that she wishes to live in. Now, I love how the art changes, because to me, it gives a clear-cut transition from reality to this dream state. I like how the real world has more clean-cut, straight-edge type of lines, the colors showing different shades of gray and blues, nothing really special. But as soon as you get into these dream sequences, it reminds me something off a cover of a romance novel. Each panel looks like a painting with an overdramatic, grandiose type of flair. So after imagining that she just kissed Darth Vader on the lips, she stumbles into the med bay, but at the exact wrong time, because Vader was just having his helmet put back on, so she almost saw his exposed face, and Vader don't like that. So a force pushes the doctor, telling him that he needs to get control of his med bay or he's gonna find somebody else who will. And in her mind, the nurse sees this as Darth Vader in a way protecting her from the doctor, and then she starts beginning to clean up the treatment area. And that's where she spots it, a little piece of his armor that's covered in blood. And then she picks it up with a giddy smile and makes her way back to her room. Except she pulls off the cover of the vent and reveals this small little box. And as she opens it up, we see various parts of Darth Vader's armor that was left behind in the med bay after every visit. And we even see a vial of his blood. So we can see that she doesn't just have a crush on Darth Vader, but she is obsessed with him. Now, sometime after, Vader comes back to the Death Star with this TIE fighter pretty much destroyed, and he's all banged up, and he marches his way into the med lab. And on the way there, he sees the nurse, and he demands that the doctor meet him there immediately. But instead of going to get the doctor, she decides to start prepping Darth Vader herself. But the doctor comes in pretty quickly and kicks her out. Now, as she's walking out, she's having another fantasy of her and Vader on some battlefield somewhere, and Vader is hurt, and she's coming to his aid, and she's fixing him up and fantasizing that she's his lady. And when Vader leaves this time, he just doesn't leave small bits of his armor, but he actually leaves his cape. And when she sees it, she thinks that he left it specifically for her. And as she's sneaking it back to her quarters, she's smelling it, and she's grabbing it, and she's imagining her and Vader dancing together. And that's when the doctor barges in and sees what's going on, and he is livid and screams at her, "Don't you know what he would do to you if he saw this?" And then he takes the cape and sees the box of bloody mementos, and he takes that too, and he throws it all down the garbage chute. She runs her way all the way down to the trash compactor, hoping she'd be able to find it. She doesn't see it, so her desperation leads her to sticking her face in the dirty, polluted water. And as she comes up, she's devastated and delirious. Because in her next fantasy, she is donning something similar to what Darth Vader wears, and she has the doctor in a force choke, squeezing his neck until it breaks. And in a daze, she makes her way to the quarters of Darth Vader himself. And as she touches the keypad to open the door, by the look in her eyes, she has clearly gone insane. Now you figured that the door to Vader's room would probably be locked, but you thought wrong, because his reputation of being the Emperor's right hand of death and destruction pretty much guaranteed nobody's going to be going into his room for any reason whatsoever. And our nurse is about to experience that firsthand. As she opens the door to his chambers, he's in there meditating with his face exposed. Now what's alarming the most is his dead, soulless eyes. Now as she blabs on about wanting to be together and how that he's more beautiful than she imagined, he stares back at her with those vacant eyes and cuts her off mid-sentence by stabbing his lightsaber into her belly. And without any emotion, he puts on his helmet, stands up, calls the bridge, and tells him to get the trash out of his room. Now we all pretty much knew that that wasn't going to end any other way. Now it's kind of sad to think that her life must have been pretty bad for her to fall in love with someone like Darth Vader, that she was mistreated and bullied so much that someone like him could be her only protector. And it's kind of interesting to note that, although disturbing, the feelings that she had for him were kind of similar to the feelings that Anakin had for Padme. Like, he didn't care what anyone thought about the relationship. As much as they tried to keep it hidden, losing her, or the fear of losing her, is what inched him closer to the dark side, and which in turn allowed the birth of Darth Vader to end the existence of Anakin Skywalker. So we see in issue number 4 that the Rebel spy has already uploaded the schematics to the Imperial factory to the Rebel Alliance. Now, as they're planning their attack, a young pilot enters the meeting and pretty much volunteers for this extremely dangerous mission. But the captain of the squad fires back, saying that you haven't had any battle experience and we only need seasoned pilots on this mission. And then he goes on to tell him about his past, where his father used to be a smuggler back on Coruscant, and one day when he was a kid, his father was being arrested by some stormtroopers. Now, he was tucked away in a vent with a blaster aimed at the stormtroopers, and as soon as his dad gave him the signal, he was supposed to take them all out. And when his dad yells for him to shoot, he froze, and the stormtroopers killed his father right there in front of his eyes. So after bringing this up in the meeting, he tells him that I'm not a scared little kid anymore, and if you give me a shot, I will take it. And the person in charge of the meeting pretty much gives him the green light to join them on the mission. Now fast forward, while the mission is currently taking place, they set up a small skirmish with the Empire fleet, and they tricked the Empire into thinking that they had won the fight, but in actuality they just shut down all their power to their X-Wings and slowly drifted off of auxiliary power, following in the direction that the Imperial fleet was going. Because they don't know exactly where this factory is, but they do have the schematics for it, and they do know that this fleet is on their way there now. So all they got to do is play possum and follow them to their destination. Now the fleet commander or the rebels did not expect Darth Vader being there, getting upgrades done to his TIE fighter. Now the rebels make their presence known by opening fire, and immediately Darth Vader jumps into action. And he's taking each one of these rebels out one by one till there's only 2 left, the captain of the squad and the young pilot that sad storied his way into this mission. And so the captain, being hardcore as she is, she sacrifices herself to give this kid a clear shot at taking Vader out. And as he has Vader in his sights, that tough talk he was pitching in the meeting disappears, and out comes that scared little boy again, and he doesn't take the shot. And then he hightails it back to the rebel base. And as he comes crashing into the hangar, he jumps out of his X-Wing and starts puking all over the place. And people are asking him, what's going on? Where is everybody? And with a blank face, he just says, everybody's dead. And then explosions as the rebel base is being peppered by blaster fire from the Imperial fleet that's followed him here from the factory. And as the base is going up in flames and people are dying all around him, this kid's last words are, I had the shot, I just couldn't take it. Now, for all of you who are listening out there, or if you even read this issue, I think you all can get the idea that how unbelievable this really would be. That unless the rebels were down to a few men, there's no way they would send this person with 0 battle experience out to a mission like this. With that said, this is a Darth Vader miniseries, and in this issue, we really didn't get to see much of him. Now, to me, this is probably my second least favorite issue in this miniseries, because to me, the whole bleeding heart story thing came off as corny. Now, here we go into the last issue of the series, and we find ourselves on Locud 7, where Vader has tracked down the rebel spy he's been trying to get this entire time. Now, Locud 7 is a tropical planet with a lot of dangerous vegetation and a lot of dangerous animals. But on it is a bar that serves sort of a refuge for those who are with the Empire as well as for those who are with the Alliance. Now, the owner of this bar has a strict policy that there's no weapons allowed. So as people are entering in, along comes the rebel spy. And what it looks like to me is just before he enters the bar, it seems like he's sending the schematics over to the Rebel Alliance. Now, as he goes in, he shares some banter with the owner because apparently they know one another, but the owner takes takes his leave and starts putting that stockpile of weapons into a holding place, and as he's just finishing up, that's when he hears it. The sounds of mayhem and murder. Because Vader has arrived with a squad of stormtroopers, and they're tearing up their place. They're killing everybody, looking for these schematics. And scared out of his mind is the bar owner. So he reaches back into this holding compartment and grabs whatever weapon he can find. And it just so happens, he grabs the case that has the schematics in it. And as he's making his way out the back door, that's when Vader shows up. As the bar owner is running, he falls into a bunch of flowering annexin, a thorny plant. It won't kill you, but it'll definitely put you on an acid trip. And immediately he starts hallucinating. And that's when Vader approaches, but instead of seeing Darth Vader, he sees like this dark, shadowy figure with a lightsaber that's turned itself into a snake. But the bar owner has some mild fortune as some sort of living plant decides to wrap itself around Darth Vader, which gives him a chance to get back on the run. And even though he's hallucinating, he's from this planet, so he is able to recognize things even through this haze, and comes across his uncle's hunting lodge and goes inside to hide. But due to his condition, the heads of the creatures that are mounted on the mantle start coming to life as monstrous beasts. So he pulls out his blaster and starts shooting anything and everything that he can see. And that erratic blaster fire makes enough chaos and commotion that Vader easily finds him. And the bar owner runs to the basement of this lodge, and then he starts seeing the ghosts of all the people who died in the bar. And they are everywhere. So he grabs a grenade from the case that he has and Hail Marys it into the army of hallucinations. And he finally rests easy because he thinks he found some peace. But that's when he hears the whirring of a lightsaber. He looks up and sees a monstrous version of Darth Vader screaming, "Give it to me." And so he does, with great haste. And Vader, satisfied with his accomplishment, radios back to base that his mission has been accomplished, and he walks away. And leaves behind a bar full of death and destruction, and a bar owner filled with trauma and terror. So, that's the end of Vader Dark Visions. Now, when I first saw this series, I thought it was going to be something more like we get to see different sides of Vader in these different situations, but it really wasn't that. It was more like we got to see other people's perspective of Vader, which some were different, but some were also the same. Because the first one we see him as sort of a savior, the second one a dealer of death, the third one the dead end to a never existing relationship, the fourth as more of like the symbol of a reoccurring theme in the life of this rebel pilot, and the last just being again like this death dealer. If I had to put them in order from what I like the most to what I like the least, it would probably be the order in which these issues came out: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with 2 and 3 being pretty much dead even with one another. But that's just my opinion. If you guys would like to share your opinions, you can go ahead and do that in the comments below. And as always, I thank, appreciate, and love all you guys out there. Always remember to support your local comic and game shops. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.